Welcome to the Digital Marketing Mentor. I'm your host, Danny Gavin, and together with industry leaders and marketing experts, we'll explore the meeting point of mentorship and marketing. We'll discover how these connections have affected careers, marketing strategies, and lives. Now get ready to get human. Hello, everyone. I'm Danny Gavin, founder of Optage, marketing professor, and the host of the Digital Marketing Mentor. Today, I'm really excited to introduce Yehuda Cagen. He's the senior marketing director of Ostendio. With over 20 years of marketing experience, Yehuda has proven himself as a results-oriented marketing leader with the ability to develop, implement, and manage forward-driven marketing campaigns that drive lead generation, increase revenue, and elevate brand value. Yehuda has been a part of my life and my community for many years, someone who I have looked up to throughout my path and growth. So it's a real honor to have Yehuda here today. How are you?
I'm great. Thank God. How are you?
I'm really good. This interview is a long time coming, and I'm glad that we are able to do it today.
I think it's a big mistake, but yeah, I'm just kidding. Go ahead.
So let's start off with your personal history, your educational and work background. How did you get here today?
To marketing and where I'm at here. Well, I mean, as a kid, I was always interested in like advertising. I think when I got sick of playing with my toys or just, video games or whatever it is, we literally had a game where we went into the pantry, select an item, and then do an ad on it. And that was always fun for me. Not as fun as like baseball or something like that in that arena. I mean, it was a lot of fun, and I always kind of gravitated towards it. I love to do creative things. I actually started my career at an advertising agency at Sacknoitz and Company, which is unfortunately no longer in existence. I think it's like in the Norwegian consulate now. So if I would have stayed, I would have taken a totally different path. Just being in Houston, I kind of gravitated more to B2B type marketing just because at the time that was the predominant types of services that we had, or types of products that we had in Houston to market. So I kind of gravitated towards the B2B side, though. I was first intrigued by the concept of advertising and marketing from mostly consumer brands.
And that game that you used to play, was that something you and your brothers came up with, or was it like your dad, your mom? I find that so cool.
Yeah, no, I mean, it's both cool and sad, I think. No, it's definitely something wasn't mandated by my parents. I'm sure they would like for me to go in a different direction, but no, that's something we just came up with. I guess we got bored of our toys or whatever, or maybe it was on Shabbat, and we didn't have many options or as many options. And so that's what we did. And, we had a good time with it.
So I know that you got a master's in communication from the University of St. Thomas. How do you feel that helped you with your path?
Yeah, I think it certainly helped me get into certain doors, right? As far as, marketing has evolved so quickly that you have to kind of stay on top of things to make sure that the mechanisms, the processes, the tools are all still relevant, right? Otherwise, I'd be opening up a Chronicle ad for, goods and services. But it's helped me from the standpoint of kind of opening up doors. I think. I think people like the fact that I had a degree in higher education, not higher education, but a graduate level degree in this discipline, and so it kind of opened up some doors for me. But from then, from that initial interview, you kind of have to prove yourself after that.
It's funny that you make a joke about the Chronicle, because I was once at a conference that was, I think the main sponsor was the Chronicle. And I remember one of the speakers who got up onto the stage, they started trashing newspapers and how they're dead and there's all the problem. And everyone was looking at her do you realize who the sponsor of this talk is?
Oh my God, yeah. Now I'm going to get hate mail from the Chronicle. No, I didn't mean that. I mean, it's just a legacy media. That's what I meant. Sometimes legacy media has come into play. I remember when, the whole, write an actual ad or you write a letter to someone. That was okay, whatever. We got email now. We got all these different tools now. And then now writing a handwritten letter is, fully embraced as a very nice personal touch. So, no offense to the Chronicle or newspapers.
Yeah, of course not. Okay, so as we delve into the world of mentorship, Yehuda, how do you define a mentor?
I think a mentor is anybody that you can learn from. So I'm a big fan of where it says in Pirkei Avos, Ethics of Our Fathers, in famous sages of Judaism, that said that you could really learn something from everyone. And so I like to think that I take that verb pretty seriously. Anytime you can learn something from someone, whether they're someone with less experience, more experience, older, younger, I think there's all your entire journey is to keep learning. And so, sometimes there's a formal mentorship, and sometimes people are mentoring without even know they're mentoring. So, for me, it's more along the lines of, someone that can kind of guide you to where you want to be. But for me, I've always had a lot of informal mentors, and I'm sure there's some people that I think of as mentors that probably didn't think of, they didn't think that of themselves.
Yeah, I think it's so important to keep your eyes open to everyone and learn a little bit from everyone. If we keep our eyes closed, we miss out on all these wonderful opportunities. I know that there was an important man in your life, a guy called Brian Grodner. And
Yeah.
how about we talk him a little bit? I know he's not necessarily a professional mentor, but because I know he had a big impact on your life, love to know, like, why was he a special guy?
Yeah, now you're getting me emotional. And when I get emotional, I start saying silly things. Yeah, he was really special. I mean, I'll tell you the first time I met him. So I was at a birthday party in the Texas Medical Center area. Most of the people there were familiar to me. Some were not, and I presume they were patients, getting treatment at the medical center. And there was one gentleman that sat next to the birthday boy, if you will, and he just had a smile like beaming from ear to ear. But you could tell that he had gone through some pretty rough treatment, either chemo or, whatever it may be. It might have been a combination of multiple treatments. But he looked like he was clearly in pain, yet he had a smile from ear to ear, and that turned out to be Brian. He actually moved into the neighborhood, and I knew he was having a bad day when I asked him how he was doing, and he would say, I'm doing good. So that meant that today was pretty bad, right? So there was never a bad word, I should say, coming out of his mouth, which is just so impressive to me. And I said, I'm gonna do my best to kind of, follow that type of attitude. And I'll say I failed miserably at that, but every so often I think of Brian for sure. When I'm moaning about the weather, rising above 78 degrees, I think Brian probably wouldn't have an issue with the 79 degrees. So I'll probably let it go this time.
Yeah, and I knew Brian as well, and I feel like he's like a once in a generation type of, right? It's kind of like he descended upon our community to kind of inspire and teach people like that idea of being positive. Yeah, we were very lucky to have his presence here and, inspire us.
Yeah, and he was one of those people that was a mentor and he didn't even know he was. And I think a lot of people feel that way. I mean, the people that I've spoken to, they probably feel the same way. I mean, and, it's hard, the lines, especially now that everyone's remote, it's hard, the lines between professional and personal are very much blurred these days. And so, even though he wasn't a mentor, in a traditional sense, and he wasn't a mentor in a career, there's a lot to be said about keeping a positive attitude, particularly if you're in a leadership role.
There are a lot of situations that come your way where can be negative, maybe difficult or stressful. And if you have that ability to kind of rise above that and maintain positivity, it really helps and just allows you to enjoy life, right? Because often we have stressful situations, but if we can remain positive, it helps a lot.
It helps more than I think people think, and definitely more than I think sometimes, because, you're always kind of, in the day-to-day drudge. The fact that he actually ran a business while he was going through this like horrendous treatment and through this, battling this horrendous disease. And, from him to just kind of silo that part of his life, or at least accept it to some degree. I mean, I don't even know how he did it, honestly. And I'm typically impressed when I don't understand how people do what they do. I mean, that's a lot of my fascination with sports goes along those lines. I mean, you go to the batting cages, and I don't know how they're adjusting from fastball to curveball to changeup. And then the same thing would be with regard to anything professional, or the manner in which people conduct themselves, like Brian did, was just I just don't know how he did it. And so I'm always so impressed, and I tend to gravitate to things that I just don't think I could possibly do. So in short, I gravitate to a lot of things.
Well, sports and good people are really good things.
Yeah.
So let's now talk about a little bit about the bosses who are instrumental in your career development. Maybe they were types of mentors, but definitely I'm sure you learned a thing or two from each one of them as you moved along, your trajectory.
Oh, sure. Actually, I came into marketing, as I mentioned. I started as an intern at an advertising agency called Cagen and Company, and the boss, I mean, the owner is so weird how that turned out that way, but his name was actually Larry Saknowitz. So it's just a crazy coincidence. And one of the things that I remember, actually, the funny thing is that I just saw a post today that today was his yard site, or the day of his passing. So it's very interesting that you're asking that question right now. But he would always make a point as he came in to say hello to everyone. And I will say at that time that I wasn't a very high ranking officer in the advertising agency, but he'd go along and he'd say something like, hi Connie, hi Becca, hi everyone, and then as he's passing me, he'd say, hey Monty Shma Rabbi, and then just go on and stuff like that. And so just to be able to kind of connect with people on their own level, I think was a huge strength of his. So I always found that very impressive. But he's a super engaging individual, like a bright light coming into the office.
It's been so fun to have a personality like that around.
When I first started, I was literally my office was right next to his, because I think it was originally a closet or something. No, I don't know if it was. But it was a small office. So, they put the interns wherever they can find space. But I heard some really cool stories, just kind of eavesdropping on kind of conversations he had. I mean, he had like city dignitaries come into his office and things like that. So it was pretty cool to see all these people kind of walk through.
Yeah. On the podcast, we often talk about how important and powerful internships are. We kind of underestimate what it can provide you in your career. It sounded like that was an amazing experience to kind of start off with.
Yeah, it was. And I also had some not so amazing experiences, but I think it did shape me. When I came in, I mentioned earlier that, I was fascinated with the creativity of advertising and marketing and everything you can kind of build around that. And I was excited to to kind of pitch my ideas, even though I was an intern. So, every so often they kind of throw me a bone and kind of say, hey, what do you think of this? Or how do you, can you write something around this? And I get super excited about doing it. And mind you, I was coming right out of school. I remember the first few times, and there was more red ink than my black ink. And I was just, I was devastated, and I was just kind of like, oh my God, this is not right for me. I got to find another industry. I got to find something else to do because I'm just not cut out for it. One of the things that I learned, just when dealing with people on my team, I try to keep that in mind when I'm, editing or providing recommendations for content or whatever it may be, marketing materials, as it were. And I try to keep that in mind, even though like what it turns out to be is you're almost like you try to get to these edits in between meetings or after hours. So it's often like times when you're either rushed or, really tired at the end of the day. But, it taught me to kind of, have a heart when you're doing this, because for the most part, I mean, thank God I've been blessed with a lot of great people that work with me, and for the most part, they're just amazing, individuals. They're amazing. They have amazing marketing abilities and skills. And I want to let them know that. It's just that based on my experience, I think this might work better. So I try to frame it that way when I can.
You know how it feels. So let's make sure that when I pass it on to the next person, I do it in the right way.
Yeah, no, yeah, exactly. I mean, I know this is a podcast around mentorship, but I think a lot of the experiences that I had, the negative experiences I have are, unfortunately, sometimes they resonate, and you can let that just stew with you and just say, oh my gosh, I had these, or you can say, well, if I'm ever in that position, I'm not going to let that happen to the people that work with me. And so I try to take that crate. And, sometimes I might slip up, but I think one of the things that I like to let people know is that if you have something that you'd like to tell me, or if you feel I'm doing something wrong, or if you feel you'd like to go in a different direction, please feel comfortable enough to let me know. And when people do, I feel comforted knowing that they're comforted in being able to speak honestly with me.
Yeah, keeping that open line of communication is so important. It's something that I try to do and push as well in my company. It's hard though, because not everyone feels comfortable, even when you make it comfortable, right?
And you feel bad because, you want them to feel comfortable. But at the same time, if you're there, if they report to you, there's that certain level of tension, which I try to bring down that barrier, but there's that. And so, so much so that when I actually refer to my team members, like I'll say my colleague, right? They're equals. We just happen to be in different positions, but, because of, may have a little bit more experience, but, to be honest, a lot of them have experiences that I don't have. And I'm fortunate enough to be in this position. And so I think if you treat it that way, then people will eventually understand that, you really mean that you can come to me with anything, and, I won't think any less of you. I'll probably think more of you.
So I know later on in your career, there's people like Peter, at DS Central, Grant, currently at Ostendio.
Yeah.
Any other lessons or cool things that you've learned from those individuals?
Peter hired me originally as a product marketing person at DS Central. Peter Edlund, I'm talking about. One of the things that was great about him was that he really made, you segued very nicely into, without even knowing, perhaps, maybe you did. It makes you the podcast genius that you are. So, but he really made you feel comfortable, right? He made you feel that, there were times where he was saying, well, here's the case. And I would say, well, why is that the case? And I think there were times that my pestering of questions were extremely frustrating to him. He would joke that there was literally a line in the carpet for me coming to his office, constantly asking him questions. And I'm sure, and sometimes I thought that he was really annoyed by it. And I apologized, I had to apologize constantly for it. But afterwards he told me that it really helped him. He really helped me help him by making me feel really comfortable. And the funny thing is, there was a story that the first time that the first day I started at DS Central, he said, do you know this area well? And it was a good commute from where I live, about 45 minutes at minimum. And so he said, all right, here, come on, let's hop in the car. So I hopped into his car, and he just drove me around the neighborhood, showing me things. And that really, again, that brought that whole barrier down, that perceived barrier. And it really helped me, feel comfortable there from the get-go. And I think, like, it's interesting, like when you're always kind of looking behind your back, kind of saying, okay, what is someone going to think? What is someone going to think? It's almost as if like you're running, on the second floor without a guardrail, whereas, when you're comfortable with the person that you have to directly report to, it's almost like I can run across on this second floor, not having any fear that I'm going to fall, because that guardrail is there, and that guardrail being your supervisor, your boss. So he was one of those people that really, from the get-go, just made me feel comfortable.
It's so fascinating, because sometimes people have the hard job of being a boss, but then also giving you room to be a friend in a way, right? Or like an equal. Sounds like he was able to kind of balance that relationship quite well.
He did it very well, very well. And I'd almost say the same for Grant as well. One of the things actually that attracted me to Ostendio was the fact that they took that so seriously. I mean, they were kind of a people first type of company. I mean, they take that approach to security, shameless plug, but they take that seriously in terms of how they deal with their employees. And that's and Grant built that culture. He was very conscious about, building that into the culture. And as a matter of fact, he speaks to every single individual who's hired on the team to kind of portray that to him, let them understand his vision and how everyone has to kind of work together. And then the individual is very much appreciated, and their contributions are key to the success of the company. And so, him building that culture. And I haven't had the time, as much time with Grant that I had with Peter. I mean, I had 6-7 years with Peter, but he's built that into the company culture, which is just fabulous.
Amazing. You really have had some awesome mentors in your life. Let's switch now to mentorship and you being more of the mentor. So I know you spoke a little bit about how you deal with your team, but how's experience been in general, like being that senior director, being that VP, running a team of people?
I love it because I can just have everyone do everything for me. No, I'm just kidding. No, and I, as a matter of fact, I like the approach. I don't remember who said it. It was definitely not me that came up with this, but leadership is understanding that you work for the people that work for you, so to speak, right? Those are the people that you have to work to help them, not vice versa. They're not doing work for you. You just let me know how I can help you be the best that you can be, right? So to me, it's been great. And and as I mentioned, there are some people who have worked, on paper, worked for me, but I've learned a tremendous amount from them. I mean, it's just, and to be honest, there have been some people that have, in the beginning of my career that were, not very accountable, but I've been extremely blessed to work with some really, really great colleagues. And I kind of look out for that. When I look to hire people that are obviously skilled, but for the most part, I can probably tell their level of skill or their skill level, from their resume, and maybe for the first minute or two, understanding what their understanding of their roles and whether they can achieve in those roles. But the bulk of the interview is understanding their accountability and most importantly, their ability and their willingness to work with others. And because that is key, especially, I haven't worked in huge marketing departments. They've ranged from 3 or 4 people to up to 10 at the heyday in TS Central. When you have a lot to do, then you have that exponential power of everyone working together, and it's so key, particularly in marketing when you're dealing with, let's say, those that are in the digital marketing versus the content marketer, right? So the content marketer is the kind of the fuel for the engine of the demand gen side, right? So they have to work so symbiotically, and so actually that's probably one of the things that I'm most proud of is the ability for the team, the people on my team, on our team, just to the manner in which they work together is just extremely gratifying.
So being a mentor, there's often formal and informal times. What are you trying to teach and instill into people that are working with you, particularly like in the informal times? Like, is there a way that you behave, an attitude? I know we've spoken before about positivity, but anything else that you're kind of trying to show and teach people?
I don't know about teach people, but I try to parlay or I try to communicate that, despite what people are saying, they're better than they give themselves credit for, right? And that's why I hired you. I believe in you. I recognize your skill set. I recognize your ability. I recognize your, a lot of your qualities as a person. And I want them to know that I believe in them, and that while at times we may disagree, it's not because that they're any less of a professional or of an individual, but for the most part, I want to let them know that they're better, because most people are very self-critical, especially in marketing, where some things are subjective. Obviously, if you do an A/B test, you can have some. You'll understand which one is the actual winner. There are a lot of things that are subjective until you get to that point. And so I like to communicate to the people that work with me that, that I believe in them and that they're probably better than what they give themselves credit for.
So Yehuda, I know you are a great dad, together with your wife.
We're both great dads.
Both great dads. So, you've raised 4 awesome children together. Do you have any mentoring moments that you're particularly fond of when thinking back about mentoring your kids?
Holy smokes. So first of all, I'm a terrible disciplinarian. There are times where, I feel like I'm going to fly off the handle, but you just kind of try to understand, like, what would the effect be on your kid? Now, obviously we're all not perfect, and sometimes we do, lose our tempers. But there wasn't a story where, a few of my friends were talking about something, particularly around discipline. My kid did this, how do I discipline him? I got to let them know that this is not okay, and, that's not okay. I was kind of half listening to discussion, and I was walking away, towards something else, and they stopped me and said, how do you discipline your kids? I don't know where it came from, honestly, but it really kind of like struck me at that time. I said, I choose to discipline my kids the way that I like God for disciplining me for any, bad actions that, any misdirection in my life. And even if you're not religious, just think about it, like, I choose to discipline my kids in a manner in which, like, my boss or my clients would like to discipline me and let me know when I'm doing wrong. So, it's a classic, do unto others creed.
All right. So now we're going to segue into your marketing expertise, which is marketing and branding. Most of your work has been for tech companies or software, SaaS. What drove you to that industry?
Circumstance, really. As I mentioned, in the beginning of our discussion, I was enamored by the consumer brands and the creativity around those consumer brands. And then, living in Houston at the time, it was a lot of oil and gas, a lot of healthcare tech, and then some other tech kind of companies. And then I just because there's so many different options in the professional services area, I kind of found my way in that direction. It was kind of like divine intervention, kind of pointing me in that direction.
But you seem to have stayed in that direction, right? I feel like as like your second or third stop.
No.
Like, what's keeping you there?
Mostly the big paychecks. No, I think, I think to a certain extent, you build that expertise and you just want to kind of parlay that expertise into new and exciting opportunities. And so, I'm sure I'd love to get into the consumer sector and have some fun with that. But when it comes down to it, though, and honestly, a lot of people treat B2B differently than B2C, and in many regards, they're correct. But at the end of the day, you're talking with people. I mean, you might be, within a B2B sector, you're probably talking about a committee of people, right, or a group of people, as opposed to just like positioning a candy bar at the checkout counter, like impulse buys. You don't impulse buy a cloud security platform, right? But I think at the end of the day, you're still talking about people. And I think those that can kind of have a little bit of fun with it in the B2B sector and maybe be a little bit more creative, going back to the old ways of doing things like newspaper or the written letter, right? If you can kind of find ways to use a B2C approach to to B2B, I think people appreciate that, to be honest. And with everything so cluttered nowadays in terms of the marketplace and messaging, if you're being too conservative from a marketing standpoint, I think that's more risky than being taking some chances and trying to find a way to stand out. Because otherwise, and especially with a smaller company that's dealing with larger competitors and a much many more resources, you got to find a way to be a little bit more bold.
And along those lines, like dealing with tech companies, you're usually trying to communicate a fairly complex or niche product or service. Is there a particular way that you approach those types of branding projects, given that it could be kind of hard to succinctly describe the offerings and personality of a brand like those?
Yeah, no, there's no question about that. Obviously, you're almost never working in a vacuum. There's always some level of competition. Even if you're doing something new. I mean, I worked for a cloud computing service, in the mid 2000s, and that wasn't quite the buzzword it was. But even if it's a new type of service, there's still the incumbent, what the incumbent service that they're working from, right? It might be, in-house IT versus, external IT, but there's still something you have to work against. And I think you have to home in on that one or two areas at, tops, that differentiate you and really differentiate you. And then you work off of that, right? So it's just the single message, even though your tech tool may have 1,000 different features. So you got to home in on the one that's really, really important, and it really personifies your values, your brand. And then everything has to come from that. And if it doesn't, then I think you have to try to write the course, because if you start going into a million different directions, then, you mean nothing to no one, in most cases. It's important to kind of have that single, flag that you plant in the ground and say, this is us, this is what we believe in, these are our brand values, and then build around that. Now, obviously, it's not as simple as, let's say, Bud Light or whatever, but I mean, no one thought that, car insurance was something you could have fun with until, you have those Geico commercials. So again, those are the things that you kind of build on one specific area. And then obviously you may have different personas or different markets, and that may vary slightly depending on which market you're gearing it towards. But again, there's that beacon that you always have to establish and then work towards that beacon.
And I assume like when establishing that beacon, you are like talking to your customers. So how do you gain insight from your customers on what they truly feel is valuable in order to make your marketing consistent and more effective?
Well, I think as a marketer, I think you have to, first of all, you have to talk a lot with the CS team or customer success, or, those that have the most involvement, most face-to-face time with customers. You also have to look at the perspective of the sales team, right? Because they're in your position, except that they're really on the front lines. They're talking face to face to the prospects. And I will say that, sometimes, you start a job in marketing, and you ask a lot of people questions about a lot of different things. You can go from CS to the IT team to the sales team, and you can develop some really great copy. And then you go to your first trade show, or you attend your first event, and it's like, it is that, but it's so much more than that. It just kind of, it rounds it out. And that's when you really start to pick up in terms of momentum, in terms of your messaging. That's when it really starts to hit, when you can really kind of see it for yourself, listen to some calls if you can. I mean, a lot of these sales tools like, Sales Loft, Outreach, Gong, you're able to listen to these conversations, and at the very least do that, because it can really give you a rounded view of kind of the concerns that people have. Because, oftentimes people will express their concerns, but there's always something a lot deeper than what that what they'll tell you in a face-to-face conversation with you asking questions. Even when you're developing a case study, you'll say, well, what's so great about this? How are things before versus now? They will tell you something different than what they were actually feeling. But when you're listening to those conversations, when you're in front of them and you're face to face and having discussions around their concerns and their doubts, there's a lot of things that you don't see, even, when them actually telling it to your face, saying, this is what I believe, there can be something that's totally different that you don't see. I mean, the whole story with Coke and the new Coke back in the day is a great example of that, right? So new Coke, Coke was losing some taste test to Pepsi, and they were thinking, oh goodness, what are we going to do? So they came out with this, and they actually tested this new Coke concept. I'm sure your listeners know, it won all the taste tests. Even it beat Pepsi, it beat, the old Coke. And then when it came out, people were like, no, I don't think so. This isn't for us. And so it kind of shows the value of the brand and what people feel is so much more important than what they're thinking about and what they're methodically saying, as opposed to what their real feelings are.
And what it sounds like, it's really an iterative process, right? So even if you're going to get to the best point, but you're only going to really know how it's going to work when you actually stick it out there and put it into the market. How do you approach like the key decision makers or key stakeholders, like the CEO or people up there, to convince them, okay, it's a process, this is what we think it's going to work, but we need to put it out and test it. Like, how do you have that discussion? Do you usually find that those people agree with you, or is it a process in itself?
So I think what you do is, whoever you have to champion it to, you got to ask those questions, right? You got to ask those questions about what they feel is differentiates you from the competition. Why do clients go with us? And then just corroborate that with what you're hearing from clients and client conversations or prospect conversations. And so those are things that you have to do to make sure that that's correct. And then you take that and you say, look, we know from from the conversations that we had that X is super important, and that if a company does not take this direction, and that direction obviously reflects on the product or service itself. So if the company does not take that direction, then we feel that they're going in the right direction, and then you base the messaging off of the conversations that you had with them. Because if they're going to tell you one thing, now when you get into something hairy, you kind of get, in instances where they'll say something and then they'll say, oh yeah, that, but there's also this, right? So there is, when you say iterative process, I think that's a big part of it. So I think you have to really have those honest conversations and not just say, hey, what do you think? And again, dig in a little bit more, ask those whys. I mean, that's what I think what made Peter and my relationship so successful. I kept on asking why, not obviously not to bug him, but I really wanted to get to the crux of it and to the meat of it. And so to make sure that I did that, we have to ask a lot of questions. And maybe sometimes it just takes, rubbing out the rug on the way to your boss or to maybe the executive team, because getting their feedback and getting their understanding of what works and what doesn't. Now, what happens is that sometimes you're in an instance where what the executive team says differs from what clients say. So the executive says, our primary differentiator is X. And then when you have conversations with prospects and or, clients, they'll say, well, what made your company different or unique is Y. That's where it gets a little challenging, right? Because you got to start saying, well, I'm hearing from our clients something a little different. And they might say, well, that probably has to do with X, Y, and Z. But really, when it comes down to it, so you really have to have those discussions and you have to kind of speak honestly and don't be afraid to ask, why. Because what happens is that if you just take it, at a surface level and you're not really digging in, you do a lot of work and some discomfort on the front end so that you'll have a lot more success on the back end.
It reminds me of the parable I always give to teach people about SEO. The company or the boss always thinks that a product or service is called one way, but then you actually do the research. Like, what do you mean? That's not what people are searching for. And that's half the battle. But so
how do you do that? How do you battle that?
Ooh, that's a great question. Well, the nice thing about SEO is you have the tools to show keyword data, density and volume, and and you can always use that. It's not perfect by any, by any means, but it gives you a little bit more value. And I think that's the same with you, right? When you have that data available, you can break down those preconceived notions that maybe some of the higher people, in the organization think.
Yeah.
Well, this has been a wonderful conversation. Before we wrap up, I'd love to know about your top 3 Houston sports moments. So for people who haven't realized, Yehuda is like a huge Houston sports fan. So what are those 3 moments?
That's tough because we have 4 championships.
You got to choose 3.
I have to choose 3. So why don't we go? Well, there's definitely the last World Series because, I love that last 2022 World Series because it came on the heels of this whole cheating scandal. I'm not going to get into that. I'd rather get into politics than that. But it came on the heels of the cheating scandal. And what happened was it galvanized the relationship between the fan base and the team. Because it were almost like, when I would wear my Astros cap in New York City, it's like, it was insane. You get a lot of insults hurled your way. And we felt like we were in it together with the team. And I think it really galvanized that relationship more so even than the first championship in 2017. So I'll go with that as number 1. And then let's go with the 2 Rockets championships as 2 and 3. Again, that first one would probably be the second best moment in Houston sports history. But there've been some good moments, but I think, ultimately it's a team game and you want to win championships. So I think the first one was really special just because the first Rockets championship, because the city hadn't won any championships until that point. And then the second one was also really cool because we were 6th seed and we defied the odds. We beat all the best teams on their home court. And so, they're all pretty much up there, but in 2017 was also really cool. But just to kind of keep it, apolitical from a sports standpoint, I'll just select those 3.
I love how you bring the New York reference because I remember in '94 when the Rockets won their first championship, the big deal was we all had our Rockets gear, our championship shirts and hats, and we went to, a bunch of us went to camp in Detroit, and we were all standing when the bus arrived from New York, and just so excited, there you go, Knicks fans. So Yehuda, where can listeners learn more about you and your business?
Well, so I'm the Senior Director of Marketing for Ostendio. And so we made it easier. So you can go to Ostendio.com. There's a lot of syllables, but Ostendio.com. If you want to learn about me, you can just you go to my profile on LinkedIn.
Well, Yehuda, thank you so much for being a guest on the Digital Marketing Mentor. And thank you, listeners, for tuning into the Digital Marketing Mentor. Look forward to speaking to you next time. Thank you for listening to the Digital Marketing Mentor podcast. Be sure to check us out online at thedmmentor.com and at the DM Mentor on Instagram. And don't forget to subscribe on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you listen to your podcasts for more marketing mentor magic. See you next time.